What is up? You are listening to the third episode of the LaxFactor Lacrosse Podcast. Today we are going to get into the 2019 Syracuse men's lacrosse team and look at their schedule, their roster, and a bunch of other things. So let's go. All right, now we get into the 2019 roster, and we're going to start with who we lost. I think that's always the best way to do it. We lose Brendan Bomberry on attack. 28 goals, 8 assists. Brutal to lose that, but it's production that can easily be made up. And the way I look at that is you have a couple of, Nate Solomon and Stephen Rafis, are going to get a little bit more. They're going to eat some of those points just in going to the rack themselves and getting a few more looks. And then I think that probably Brad Voigt, guys like Brendan Curry, there's a couple of other guys. And then don't forget Griffin Cook on it if he gets a bunch of runs at attack, which I believe he's going to. They'll make up for the loss of Bomberry. So that's not that bad of a loss to eat. It's not like we lost Ben Reeves. The other one up, Matt Lane. Senior midi last year, 5 goals, 4 assists. That's easily replaceable, and he didn't factor in much by the end of the year last year anyway. I was actually hoping he was going to be one of the guys that had a really big year last year, and I was hoping that as a senior he was going to step up and put up 15 to 20 points, and he did not. Partly because the midfield got crowded once some of the freshmen started performing. We lose our goalie, Dom Madonna, but we're losing a team leader, but a goalie that only saved the ball at a 46% clip, 8-7 record in cage last year. So you don't want to lose your starting goalie any year, but we're hopefully going to be able to find someone that can at least produce that production, if not put up 50% or 51%. They really need to find a netminder that can be more consistent at ball stopping than they've had for the last couple of years. Who is coming back offensively? As we discussed, we lose Bomberry. He's replaceable, not in the sense that he wasn't a great player. He was a great player, but he's replaceable because obviously Rafis and Nate Solomon are going to eat a little bit of that production. Rafis was 20 and 28 last year, Solomon 22 and 15. But then you got Brad Voigt, who's kind of a logical replacement for Bomberry in the sense that he's a great crease man, he's a great finisher, he's fiery as hell, little guy, but he plays ball. He's a tough crease man, and he can catch the ball in those tough spots and finish in a similar way to Bomberry. But I'd also like to see Griffin Cook get some time down there. I believe that you get Griffin Cook, the new freshman, and Nate Solomon and Stephen Rafis on the field together. That's 3 legit dodging attackmen. So I think that'll be formidable, but I wouldn't be surprised to see either Brendan Curry or Brad Voigt maybe get the start at attack. We'll see. It's hard with Cuse because they don't publicize a lot of fall ball stuff, and I wasn't able to get to any events. But we have 3, either way, we have 2 solid attack in Rafis and Solomon coming back to anchor that unit. They anchored it last year. They'll do it again, and then whoever we fill in, there's 3 or 4 guys that they can fill in at that third attack spot that'll do well. At the midfield, Jamie Trimboli is the obvious big dog coming back, 21 and 10 last year. As a freshman, he scored the game winner against Duke. As a sophomore, he scored the game winner against Duke. So I'm expecting big things out of Trimboli in his junior year, out of Victor High School, upstate New York kid. Tucker Dordevic, 15 and 5, Oregon kid, great player, the second freshman in as many years. Trimboli was the first freshman in a while that came in and tore it up at the midfield for Syracuse. And Dordevic did the same thing last year with 15 and 5 production, scored the game winner against Virginia. David Libka, 12 and 2 last year. So they have a lot of talent coming back, and then they have other guys that can hopefully step up. Griffin Cook, I already mentioned, out of Jamesville DeWitt. Lucas Quinn, I've heard people say had a decent fall ball. Owen Seabold, I heard had a decent fall ball. I don't know. I have no way to confirm those 2, but I've heard good things about them. Pat Carlin. I bring Pat Carlin up partly because he's from my hometown, Vestal here. But 6 goals, 2 assists last year, played in all 15 games. So he's one of those other guys that just gives them legitimate depth at midfield, even if they had to go three lines deep. So I'm not worried about Syracuse offensively. They have the talent they need. They have an excellent system. These guys know how to run the system. These guys have all been playing together for a handful of years already. So the core group of players, solid as anybody in the country. The young guys that are playing can play with the best of them as well. So I think offensively, Syracuse is going to do good things this year. Defensively, they bring back my favorite Pole, number 21, Nick Mellon, redshirt junior. Great takeaway guy. He had 22 caused turnovers last year, 31 ground balls. I think he should be wearing number 11, even though he's not. But I think Nick Mellon, I don't think anyone would argue that Nick Mellon's the best long pole on this team, despite the fact he's not a captain, despite the fact he's not wearing number 11. Then you've got Austin Fusco, number 11. Long pole, plays up on the wing, plays a little bit of close D, I believe, also. So Fusco is a great, he's a senior this year, so he's big having him back. Brett Kennedy, redshirt sophomore, had kind of a breakout season, and I think that you started seeing him play huge when Bomberry was out with his injury. So I'm excited to see Kennedy come back. He even got time at midfield a little bit too. Tyson Bomberry, senior, captain, coming back, 26 GBs, 15 caused turnovers. He missed 4 or 5 games last year, and in that stretch, despite the fact he's not the best cover man in the country, far from it, he's an excellent team leader. He's great on ground balls, 15 caused turnovers in 12 games, so he was good for more than a takeaway each game. So Bomberry being back too. I think that core unit between Kennedy, Bomberry, Peter Dirth at the defensive midfield, short stick, 2 goals, 3 assists, 5 caused turnovers with a short stick. I think having that we pretty much have the entire catalyst back on D minus the goalie. We lose Madonna, but Madonna only saved the ball at a 46% clip anyway. So he did other things. He was a good communicator, threw that rope of a pass to Simmons for the game winner against Army. But you'd think that you could put another goalie in to save the ball at 45, 46%, and we have enough seniors on the defensive side that the defense is not going to fall apart. I'd posit that even with a new goalie, this defense should look a little bit better than they did last year, especially to start the season and getting into it. They're not going to have to learn how to get used to each other. There's not a lot of new faces that we have to work in and integrate, so I think the defense is going to be pretty solid as long as that goalie steps in and can save the ball at a 45, 50% range. I think this defense is going to be solid, as good as last year, if not better. And we'll go defensive midfield. I kind of count the whole face-off X situation as a defensive midfield. I'm just going to talk about one guy there, Danny Varello. 48% at the face-off X last year. Hopefully his junior year, he can get himself into the 52% range. He picks up ground balls, obviously, as a face-off man. He was solid throughout the year, and he came up big in a couple of games. The notable exception was losing the face-off and then letting his brother run down and stick the game winner when they played Navy, but that happens. Beyond that, you also have Fusco, senior, played a lot of wing last year also, and they'll have some other guys fill in on the wing. So at the face-off X, technically we should be stronger than we were last year. You get Varello back for another year. You'll have a couple of other guys playing underneath him. Fusco and a couple of the other mids getting on wings. I believe Brett Kennedy got on the wing a little bit. So at the face-off X, I think they're slightly better than they were last year, and they're certainly not worse. All in all, what does this mean for Syracuse? They have a tough schedule, which is true. And they always have a tough schedule, though. But when you look at their roster, in terms of offensive production, they only lost Brendan Bomberry. I say only, but they lost Brendan Bomberry, but that's 28-8 that they can replace. They have everybody else back. Every other major contributor on the offensive side besides Bomberry is back. Defensively, same thing. Every major contributor on the defensive side of the ball is back except for Dom Madonna. And then you look at the face-off X. Every major contributor outside of our backup in Delisle is back at the face-off X. We got our wings back. We've got our face-off man back. So in theory, as good as they were last year, if not better. So I think that when you look at it, this is a team that underperformed last year. Maybe they performed exactly where they should have been. They had some really good wins. Their problem was they had a couple of bad losses. And they were really bad off ball. I think that's where they really, you see the teams that they struggled against. It was Albany, excellent at going to the cage, drawing doubles, and then feeding. They get beat up by Cornell. One of the leaders in the country in terms of assisted goals last year was Cornell. They struggled off ball badly, but I think that will be cleaned up a little bit now that we have all our familiar faces back. And overall, I just think that this team has a really good chance. They're ranked 11 coming into the season. I feel like that's a little bit below what they should be. I think with everybody back, I think you see them win 10 games, 9 games in the regular season, and they make it back to the tournament. But I think this is a top 10 team all year. I think that they're going to win their first 3 games, wiggle themselves into the top 10, and I don't think that they're going to fall out of the top 10 for the rest of the season. Syracuse is one of those teams that a lot of people are talking about them because everyone always talks about Syracuse, but they're not a lot of people's favorite teams for getting to Memorial Day weekend. I don't know if I have them as one of my top picks for Memorial Day weekend, but they're easily inside that 10-4 range in my mind. I think those spots between 10 and 4 are up for grabs for anybody, and I think that teams like Syracuse and Hopkins, some of these traditional powerhouses that have more recently been outside of the top 5 and 10, granted Syracuse has been in, but by tournament time they haven't panned out. I think this is the year where you see the Virginias of the world, the Syracuses, the Hopkins of the world kind of get a little bit of that dominance back, and I think you're going to see them all hang out in the top 10, and I think they're all going to vie for a spot in the Final Four come Memorial Day weekend. Their schedule, it is brutal. A little bit. It's brutal on paper. I don't think it's, in reality, it's as brutal as it looks. There are some games that they should win. I'll first rip through the schedule in order, and then we'll kind of talk about each game. But they've got Colgate starting on February 8th. All these first 7 games are all at the Dome. So we've got Colgate, Albany, Army, West Point, Virginia, Hopkins, Rutgers, and Duke, all at the Dome back to back to back between February 8th and March 24th. Their first road game at Notre Dame, not until March 30th. And they play Notre Dame there at South Bend. They play at Hobart to start April off. Then they're going to be back home again against Cornell, at North Carolina, at Navy. On paper, it's brutal. I believe they said there was 7 teams that were ranked in the Inside Lacrosse poll that they're going to face, but let's kind of go back through that. First, we'll rip through the games. I'm going to call these cheese games, but they're really not. But these are games that Syracuse, when they put these games on their schedule, these are games they believe they should win, and it's partly why these teams are on their schedule. Partly it's regional, easy to play a team like Colgate, but that's also a game you should win. So let's kind of rip through that. Colgate, game they should win. Colgate does play tough. They usually play them closer than they should, but that's their first game of the year. That should be a W. Albany, I believe Syracuse is all set to come back and exact revenge on Albany, possibly in a serious way. Army, West Point, Cuse has beat them by 1 goal in each of the last 3 years, and they beat them by 3 in 2015. So that's always a close game. Army is never an easy win, but a win they should be nonetheless, and history tells us they should win that one. Then we get into the brutal part of the schedule, and this is a brutal 5-game stretch that they have between March 2nd and March 30th. They have Virginia at home, followed up by Hopkins at home, followed up by Rutgers at home, followed up by Duke at home. That's all Saturday, and Sunday, respectively. They play Duke Sunday on March 24th. That is the end of their 7-game home stretch, but that's a brutal 5-game stretch. Virginia, Hopkins, Rutgers, Duke, and then Notre Dame in South Bend on March 30th. Then they go in another cheese game, Hobart. Cornell is going to be tough, but they do get Cornell at home this year. I was at the Cornell game last year up in Ithaca that they lost badly. It was terrible to watch. They got North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and then Navy in Annapolis. So they end with a UNC game that's winnable on the road, and they end with Navy that's winnable on the road. They lost to Navy last year at the Dome, but they should be able to take Navy, get revenge on Navy this year in Annapolis. So that's the schedule. It's not terrible. I've heard people say they're going to have a hard time going 500. They will not. I put Cuse, in my opinion, as the maybe the second best team, the third best team in the ACC. As third, it's between Syracuse and Notre Dame. They'd be fighting over it, and I even think Duke at second. I think that Duke, Syracuse, and Notre Dame are going to battle over that 2 through 4 spot. I think Virginia is the best team in the ACC. They've got to prove it, but I think their roster is tough coming into this year, and they're going to be a tough out for anybody that plays in the ACC. But I still think that Syracuse is probably the second or third best team in the ACC. They've got a solid roster coming back. They always find a way to get into that 8-6 range, somewhere in there. So I feel like they're going to end up being 2 or 3 games above 500, possibly better than that. I feel like they have a team that's good enough to stay in the top 10 for most of the year. So we'll see how that works out. But the schedule is brutal, but they will be okay. They are going to use the strength of this schedule to get themselves into another tournament. And never forget they have the ACC tournament where they get another crack at the teams like Virginia and Duke and Notre Dame, depending on how that regular season all plays out.